This video depicts an iteration of Radio Rhizome's soundscape project in northern Michigan, with focus on the environmental, historical, and social impacts of Enbridge pipelines, especially Line 5. The soundscape on Line 3 at Minnesota Mississippi headwaters led the project to the Pipeline 5 in Michigan. The lack of an operation base led Baldari to apply to the Good Hart artist residency in Michigan, which accepted the proposal amongst the large pool of applicants nationally. The residency facilitated access to Line 5 at the Mackinac Strait, multiple sites of oil spills, tribal communities and organisations working on the matter, as well as lands that have a significant historical importance to the Anishinaabe people. The artist residency is located on the shores of Michigan Lake on historically Odawa territory, in between two important landmarks for the project. The first is an historical mass grave of the Odawa, located 1 mile to the south, and the other is the Little Traverse Conservancy, 1 mile to the north of the residency, where the first phase of Radio Rhizome soundscape took place. The project began with numerous hours of sound sampling in the region in previous oil leak sites and underwater sounds from both the lake and the Kalamazoo River. The most influential element on the sound piece was the 2 days of the International Indigenous Global Warming Gathering in Mackinac City. Generally, the organisers and the elders allowed Radio Rhizome to record and use the material. The Mackinac Island is historically one of the most important locations for the Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe is the collective term for the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Anishinaabe who formed a governed confederacy known as the Three Council Fires. The secret site of their council fire, where they would conduct important political business, was known as the Mashili Mackinac. Today it's known as Mackinac Island. During the 2 days, Indigenous leaders, activists, and scholars from North America and Siberia, as well as scientists, environmental organizations, and entities presented major challenges of settling colonialism and misuse of natural lands and water bodies by governments and private sector. Additionally, they talked about previous and ongoing environmental catastrophes such as Enbridge pipeline, oil leaks on the Anishinaabe and Dakota lands. On both days, they also performed rituals and songs and spiritual ceremonies. Now, a little bit on the history and issues of the pipeline and the reasons for this project's location. Line 5 is a 70-year-old pipeline passing through the Mackinac Strait, which connects Lake Michigan and Huron. The currents at this strait changes direction 180 degrees every 1 to 3 days, and at the peak, the flow of water is over 10 times the flow of Niagara Falls. It is identified by the researchers at the University of Michigan as the worst location for any oil spills. The video that is coming up depicts the scenario of a 1 million gallon spill. It shows that 700 miles of shoreline will be covered with oil. Enbridge pumps 25 million gallons a day. 1 million gallon spill, even if they shut down the pipes within an hour. Historically, Enbridge has never shut down a pipe during a spill within an hour. In the Kalamazoo River spill, it took them 17 hours to shut the pipe down as they realized the pressure was lowering. They thought there was a clog and increased the pressure, which caused the oil spill to become worse. The Pipeline 5 under the Strait of Mackinac was commissioned to operate for 50 years. However, it has been used for 20 extra years as of today, like an environmental time bomb. Legal battles to shut this Canadian pipeline down in American territory is challenged by efforts backed by the Canadian government, invoking treaties that, according to them, since the pipeline is coming from Canadian soil, no state nor the federal government can shut this down without the agreement of the Canadian government. The underwater section of Line 5, as you see in the footage received from the National Wildlife Federation, shows the state of the pipe. Instead of shutting it down and safely removing it, Enbridge is trying hard to run a tunnel under the lake. Decades of operation has left trauma, an already traumatized way of life, memories, and a belief system of the indigenous people of these lands. Enbridge has spent $8 million on false advertisements and smear campaigns to turn this issue into a political party battle rather than an environmental problem. This company is doing all that it can to influence state elections to favour their operation in the US. However, all the Michigan 12 tribes are united against this Enbridge. The Bad River Band banished Enbridge and ended their land lease and easement. However, Enbridge is still illegally and running oil through the pipes, passing through their lands. Enbridge has had many spills in the region. These spills happen close or on the indigenous treaty lands and public land rented to Enbridge for running pipelines. This brings us to the importance of the location of the soundscape at what is now called Good Hart, Michigan, which used to be the territory of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa. As the French colonizers and Catholic missionaries stepped foot on these lands, they brought smallpox, which spread to the indigenous population of the area, and according to local history, killed almost 90% of them. The church, located 1 mile south of the residency, is sitting on a mass grave of the Odawa. The site is now being taken care of by Eric Hemingway. He is an Anishinaabe Odawa from Cross Village. He is the Director of Repatriation, Archives and Records for the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indian. In the second half of the 18th century, until the American Revolution, the tribes here had to continuously deal with British and French forces and wars. What was left of the Odawa in the 19th century was pushed out of these lands by force. As tribal leaders reached an agreement with the US government, the families were granted their own ancestral lands, same as the government granted land to the settlers. These lands were taxed, and since the natives did not subscribe to the taxing system focused on agriculture, the government took back the lands and gave it to the settlers. This brief description is not depicting the details of the wars, treaties, forceful relocations, Indian reservations and concentration camps across the Midwest, nor is it able to do so. However, these historical traumas are adding to the fact that Line 5 is a major issue for these tribes. These very reasons are why Radio Rhizome Soundscape was conducted on the Little Traverse Nature Preserve. What is encouraging is the spirit of the indigenous of these lands that are deeply connected to these lands and are the backbone of all these efforts to protect it from further abuse. The soundscape is created with special attention to these elements by scattering 60 plus small radios in a large area of the preserve and on the grounds of the residency for the public event organised on May 21st. The radio waves were broadcasted by using the residency as an antenna. This piece is about an hour and a half long track of ritual singings of the Anishinaabe with their permission, poetry, sound pieces done by collaborators, participators, and Baldari himself by spending days in hikes and drives to specific locations and collect sounds that were later used in this piece.
Down the road there is a cemetery on the banks of the river. One day the river will flood or change course, eroding the banks and liberating those corpses from their entombment. Perhaps that is a sort of rapture. The pipeline too carries corpses, the fossilized bodies of ancient beings beyond our wildest imaginings, and the countless lives that comprise the down payment and compounding interest of this apocalyptic economy. They are planning to build this pipeline under the same river. The river is frozen, but still it flows. The river is frozen, but still it flows. The word for the deepest part of a riverbed is the thalweg. There the current is strongest. This is what they must drill beneath, and this is also where the oil will sit when the pipeline inevitably leaks and spills. This is a different sort of rapture. The river is frozen, but still it flows. The river is frozen, but still it flows. The chickadees gleefully peck away at the frozen flesh. And still under the ice, the river flows. It strikes me that this wouldn't be too bad an end. Drugged down a snowy riverbank by wolves, yapping at their prize, intricate ribs laid bare, gristle glistening in the stark winter noonlight, housing a chorus of twittering birds. I would make so many beings happy. I would feed and house such multitudes. And then the river would take me away. The river is frozen, but still it flows.